Hi, everybody. It's Leo. I'm here with my new good friend, Gustavo. Gustavo runs a channel and also a couple other social media outlets. He's got a great channel called Viajes de Fe, and it is for Spanish speaking members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints. And for, I guess, for anybody else who may be interested, I've watched a few of his videos and of course, my Spanish is rusty. We just did a video just before this completely in Spanish. And I was just like, oh man, please, Heavenly Father, please help me. Please help me to remember some of these words. And I had to use some Google for a minute there. But it was a great conversation. And Gustavo, we got to know each other a little bit before we started today. He's a good man. He's trying to minister through his channel and trying to help people who may be questioning or doubting the restored gospel. So, Gustavo, great to have you, and want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, Leo, thank you for having me. And I'm Gustavo Hernandez. I was born and raised in Mexico City. I currently live, well, pretty close to Mexico City. I've been a member of the church my whole life. This channel, Viajes FM, which is Spanish for faith journeys, I started the channel back in May, and it's been running for a few months now, and it's been a great experience. It's been a learning experience. And what inspired me to do that was uh, a couple of interesting um, things that happened in my life, but I guess we'll get to it.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear your story. So, pretty traditional upbringing, a background in the church as a member. You served, I guess you were like in young men, baptized in young men, and then did a mission and all the things because your parents are members of the church, right? You grew up in a very traditional household.
Yes, yes, and I think that in Mexico, maybe traditional can be a bit different from maybe what is considered traditional in Utah, for example. Um, Mexico City is an important place in the church for Mexico. It's like Utah for Mexico. Uh, we had the first temple in Mexico City. For a while, we had a church-owned high school um, called Benemérito, and then it was changed, and now it's the Mexico City MTC. And yeah, Mexico City, there's a lot of story, of heritage in the church. So that's a culture on its own. I was never directly involved with that, but years later I learned all about it. But yeah, growing up, I I went to church every Sunday. I loved church. I mean, I loved it as much as any kid can
Right.
love church. I mean, I was okay with it. Maybe I wasn't a fan of the 3 hour church service, or maybe I got a bit bored on Sundays, but I like church. I was not as vocal as my friends growing up. Um, my friends really loved the gospel, and every fast and testimony meeting, they would stand up and bear their testimony, declare that they knew the church was true and that Joseph was a prophet. And I never did that when I was a kid. I was pretty shy. I was terrified to even give an opening or closing prayer, so I never bore my testimony. So yeah, I was involved in church ever since I was a kid. I was not very vocal about it, but I really liked it.
Cool. And so, how about after your mission? And like any guess in between, like when you were younger, and then also after your mission, or during your mission, even, did you have any kind of interesting experiences, like challenging experiences, for example, like for your faith? Did you ever have come into like issues with questions or doubts?
Yes, and actually, the main event, the main faith crisis, happened when I was 15. And at that time, I was just going through a rough patch in my life. I was dealing with anxiety, and back then I was just trying to find comfort, to find hope. And I did that by watching uh, Mormon messages and uplifting channels. So I remember that one time I was watching a video that was about the gospel and the Book of Mormon, and I decided to take a look at the recommended video list. And one of the videos was titled Three Tests That the Book of Mormon Cannot Pass. And I remember that for some reason I was drawn to it. I thought, well, let's see if those three tests are that hard. So I clicked on the video, I watched it, it was short, and I don't remember what the three tests were, but it was just archaeology, anachronisms, things like that. So I remember that by the time I finished watching the video, everything changed. And that was the start of a 6, 7 month period of questioning. I remember that I always thought that criticisms of the church were offered by mean people trying to destroy the church, and it was all lies. And that was my belief back then.
Hmm.
And when I watched the video, I remember that I thought, well, this is not impossible, you know. Actually, I do have the questions. How can the Book of Mormon answer uh, about archaeology, or how can we answer the anachronism question? And that was the first time I started to ask the tough questions. I also thought,
And only
well,
15 years old. That's all you're only 15.
yeah,
Man, you were quite the thinker at 15.
yeah, and I
Wow.
remember that I didn't want to be caught off guard. I wanted to be ready with an answer. Because I was dealing with anxiety. I couldn't even uh, bear my testimony. So, if talking to strangers was hard for me, uh, talking about criticisms of the church without having an answer was terrifying. It was a terrifying concept for me. So, I said, okay, I need to be aware of everything. I need to have an answer ready so I don't get ridiculed. So I said, okay, the treat test. Uh, what else is out there? And I continued to watch videos on YouTube, and I found a whole world of criticisms of the church. um, I was born and raised in Mexico. Spanish is my first language, but I was able to learn English when I was a kid, so I I was able to access English YouTube channels, and that's where the main criticisms are. So, uh, you name the channel, I bet I watch all their videos back then. And I was just obsessed. And I remember that when I started to learn about the Book of Abraham, the Kinderhook plates, the endowment and Freemasonry connections, and back then I wasn't endowed yet. I haven't gone through the temple yet, and I was learning about all these criticisms about the temple. I think I learned more than I probably should have. Uh, but I was pretty well. I don't think I was scared, but I was well, maybe scared. Let's go with scared. I wasn't sure what to think of all the things I was learning, and then you add into the mix of Joseph married a 14-year-old, um, and the Book of Mormon has copy and paste sections of the Bible, and take a look at View of the Hebrews, the late war. I found the CS letter and I read it. I found Mormon Think. I found LDS discussions and everything.
Mhm.
So I I felt alone. I didn't know how to go about trying to find an answer, and I never considered telling my parents because I thought they would. I mean, I was sure they would just tell me to stop looking at that. And
Yeah, it's kind of a shame. It's a shame, ashamed, right? A little bit feeling ashamed, like you're nervous to tell them because you might get judged or something. I don't know.
maybe
Or how did
I'm not too sure
like
about that.
you felt? How did you actually feel like as you were like thinking about like you were scared to tell them, or what were you feeling?
I I wasn't scared of what they would say, but I simply thought it wouldn't help me.
Wouldn't
I
help you.
thought that they would just say, "Oh, you know what? Forget about it. Don't look into it," or things like that.
And you don't
Uh,
think your parents like knew about the information, probably, right? Like you'd studied more than them, probably, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
especially in Mexico City. I mean, um, things like the gospel topics essays and things like that are things that are unknown in Mexico. In fact, I don't even know if we have a Spanish translation of them. I bet we do, but I don't think anyone knows about them in Spanish. And yeah, it was until Saints came out that many of these topics were present, and for a Mexican or Latin America Spanish speaking members of the church. So I remember that I tried to tell my branch president, and I didn't know how to phrase it. So I just told him that I found information about Joseph online and I didn't know how to feel about it. And he said what I was expecting him to
Yeah.
say. He just said, "You know what? Don't look into it." Uh, and he knew that I was having struggles, and he said, "You know
Yeah.
what? Focus on this. Make your life better, and yeah, stop worrying so much about those things."
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I remember that we had Joseph's journal back at home. And when I learned that he was a Freemason, I remember that I tried to look for a journal entry in that year. And I found one that said, like, I don't know, July 8th, 1841. I just came back from the Masonic Lodge at Nauvoo. And I thought, wait, what? Like, that was the first time I've I felt confirmation that the criticism was true. And it was the first time that I questioned Joseph, the first time I was uncertain about him and his calling as a prophet.
Mm.
And uh, I mean, all of these things happen in a 2 month period, so it was overwhelming for
Wow,
me.
that's a lot. Yeah.
And I mean, I still went to church. I like that part of me didn't change that much. And I remember that what the hardest part for me, of course, I had questions about the church now that I learned all about these topics. Uh, but something that was hard for me was listening to the critics, because when criticisms of the church are presented online, they're presented with a bias. For example, my channel has a faithful bias, so I will always reach a biased conclusion. And for critics of the church, when they present a criticism, they will always come to a a, a non-believing conclusion. And for me, it was hard because the videos I watched and the articles I read at the end always showed, I don't know if hatred is the right word, but they always said, oh, like those Mormons, like they're just doing mental gymnastics. They're they don't have any critical thinking skills. They are programmed, brainwashed, dumb. So if I'm a kid with anxiety trying to learn about these things, and then I just watch a bunch of videos of people who think that I do mental gymnastics, that I'm programmed, that I'm brainwashed, that was hard for me. Um, so it was a combination of trying to find answers to my questions and feeling insecure because I thought these people uh, just thought I was stupid. So I remember that I was trying to uh, find answers. Uh, and for some reason, I never found any faithful answers to any of these questions. I just kept finding criticisms. And I remember that that year, and I guess people can guess how old I am, but that year the mutual theme was ask of God. And I remember that that year at youth conference, a part of it was going to one of the archaeological sites in Mexico City called Teotihuacan. And I remember that we had a tour and a brother who is a historian. He gave us a tour. He talked about um, the Aztecs and 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 things like that. Towards the end, he started to mention some connections he saw in the Book of Mormon. And I remember that when I was listening to what he had to say, I was actually very interested. And I remember that at the very end, he said, and we also have um, some pictures. I have some pictures right here of how priests would do rites back then. And I'll show this to the adults because this has connections to the temple, right? And he showed the pictures, and I I've seen bits and pieces of the endowment online, so I recognize that. Uh, so I thought, okay. So for me, maybe I never thought, oh, this is evidence the Book of Mormon is true. But I thought, okay, maybe there's more than meets the eye. Maybe there's another way to take a look at these questions. But by the end of the tour, he said, you know what? I got baptized because my friend told me to, but I didn't have a testimony. And then he told us that he was in seminary and his teacher told him that he should read the Book of Mormon and pray, and that was the way to find a testimony. So he said that that's what he did. He didn't believe in the church, but he was a member because his friend told him to. And he read, he prayed, and received an answer. And he poured his testimony with us. And I remember that I felt I should ask of God. I should do that. And I had never read the Book of Mormon cover to cover in my life. I maybe just uh, Abinadi, Alma the Younger, Nephi, Third Nephi, but that's it. So I said, okay, I have to read the book. So I said, okay, I want to finish before my 16th birthday because by then I will be ordained a priest, I will bless the sacrament, and I want to be sure that I believe in this before I do that. So I read the Book of Mormon in 3 weeks, and I remember that I spent every day, the whole day, just reading and reading and reading, and I was a bit skeptical, a bit critical. I read all about the changes and the the King James verses and mistakes and things like that. So I was kind of looking at it, and if I read, for example, the Benjamin Mosiah change, I said, "Oh, this is where they changed it," or I would uh, think in a critical way. And I wasn't too focused on the spiritual. I have to say that first time, but I read it, and I finished a couple of days before my birthday, and I read Moroni 10, and I closed the book. I took a minute to ponder, and I thought about all the criticisms. I thought about what I had just read. I thought about spiritual experiences in my life, sacred experiences for me that I've never shared. And every time that I want to share these experiences, I I feel like I shouldn't. Um, and that's something that helped me understand the whole sacred, not secret part of the temple. I understood why there are certain things that just can't be explained, or if you just tell them, they don't hold the same power. So I thought about all of that in my life. I I had gone through porn addiction when I was a kid and 19, and I went through the 12-step program. I had beautiful experiences there, and I just kept thinking about that and things that I had experienced during my life. So I knelt down, I prayed, I I told God that I asked him if this book was scripture, if it was true. And I asked him if, I said, I'm willing to follow you. I don't want to make a mistake here. Uh, if you don't want me to be here anymore, let me know. I'll follow you. I'll go everywhere you tell me. I just need to know that it's right. And when I finished, I didn't have an sign worthy experience, but I felt peace. I felt I could continue even though I didn't have all the questions. So, sorry, maybe I'm talking too much, but that's how I found criticisms. That's what I thought while I was learning about them, and that's how I chose to stay. And later on, I'll talk more about answers I received.
Yeah, well, that is, I mean, I'm guessing that people that watch this are gonna be like, holy cow, this kid at 15, man, you've like so much in your life at that age. That's just crazy. You had such a burden. You were going through so much at that time. That's just amazing. Oh my goodness. So yeah, let's keep going. I'm just on pins and needles trying to follow your stories. It's so exciting. So yeah, tell us what happened next. So you had like kind of a peaceful prayer there after you prayed after the Book of Mormon, and then you just kept going. Like what happened after that?
Yeah, once that happened, I said, okay, I'll stay here. I don't know exactly what I'm gonna do about my questions, but I believe there are answers to it. So there were things that happened that were very special to me and that made me feel like someone was aware of what I was going through. And let me explain some of them. For example, uh, I remember that one of the videos I watched, and I don't remember where that happened, Based on what I've seen online, I think it was a pageant. And there were two people dressed in 19th century clothes, and one of them was sitting in a desk, and the other one was looking into a hat, And he was just, and it was representing Joseph, translating the Book of Mormon, but in the most, I don't know, in the most ridiculous way. It looked like a Monty Python sketch, something like that, right? So I remember that seer stones and the whole face in the hat was interesting to me. Everyone grows up looking at the paintings that Joseph is like literally reading the plates, or there's a curtain or things like that. So the hat thing was pretty new to me, and I didn't know how to feel about that and about the seer stones. And I remember that, and I have to be honest, I don't remember if this happened after I had this prayer and this peaceful feeling, or if it happened before. But I do remember that I was just looking at seer stones. I was just Googling more information about it. At that time, I just knew about critics of the church. So I think that I was just looking for more criticisms. And then I found a website that's had an article titled A Faithful Approach to Seer Stones by Fair Mormon. So I thought, hey, hey, this comes from members of the church. That's the very first time I found information from a faithful source. So I was very excited. I read the article and I felt amazing. I felt peace. I felt like everything was clicking in my mind, and everything was it suddenly made sense. So I found Fair Mormon and I said, okay, let's see what else you have. And I started to find answers to many of the criticisms. Um, to be honest, nowadays, I don't look at Fair that much, but back then it was a huge tool for me. And I remember that led me to finding more faithful information online. I remember that when I was learning about the temple and all the criticisms that come with it, one of the suggested videos was titled Mormon Temples, Sacred or Sacred by 3 Mormons. So I watched the video, and that was my very first interaction with that channel, now Saints Unscripted. And I remember that I found a video titled An XX Mormon Story, and it was about Dusty Smith. And his story, for those who have seen it, it's pretty amazing. It's very special. And I remember that I had this boost in energy, and uh, I felt great. Uh, I love the fact that now I was finding faithful answers. So I just kept reading. I kept watching videos, and I was introduced to the apologetic side of the church. And I remember that one time I was thinking about, well, I was having my doubts. I wasn't sure what to think of a church, what to think of everything. And one time, the second counselor and the stake presidents was in our ward, and well, he didn't say anything. He was just there. But as soon as they were about to announce the closing prayer, he stood up and he interrupted the bishop and he said, I want to say something. And he said, brothers and sisters, I don't know why I had this impression, but I had a strong impression that I had to speak to you this morning. And he went on to talk about how on his mission he he was going to have a lesson with a family who was very open. And once they started with the lesson, the family uh, turns out uh, knew the Book of Mormon very well, and they started to use Book of Mormon verses to explain why Mormonism was false. And it turned into a heated debate. And he said he wasn't ready for that. And when he returned home, he wasn't too sure what to think. And his companion was pretty sad, and he said, "Elder, is any of these things even true?" And then he said, "I don't know why, but I felt a strong impression that I had to tell you that I told him, yes, it is true." So, brothers and sisters, uh, whatever questions you may have, I can bear my testimony that it is true. And that's it. So I've I felt that was directed to me. That felt very personal to what I was thinking and going through. And by October, in the October 2017 General Conference, I was thinking about plagiarism claims about uh, the late war, view of the Hebrews, Bible, and I didn't know how to reconcile that. And I remember that I was just thinking about that. I wasn't even paying attention to the talks. I was just thinking about that until someone stood up and said, uh, many people claim that Joseph Smith used books to inspire the Book of Mormon. And then I looked up and I was trying to see who was saying that, and it was Ted R. Callister. And I remember that I was just mesmerized by what he said. It was a simple overview of the criticisms, but it was the first time I ever heard someone address that. And he was talking about uh, why he believes the Book of Mormon translation is it's a miracle and things like that. So I remember that when he said that, I was very impressed, and I I was when I came back home, I was trying to find the talk. I couldn't find it because they hadn't uploaded the talk to YouTube yet. But I found a BYU devotional about the Book of Mormon with a brother Callister, and it was titled "The Book of Mormon: Man-Made or God-Given." And I watched the whole thing. Then I found his devotional on the blueprint of Christ's church, and all of a sudden, for months on end, I I Googled the Book of Abraham. I Googled seer stones. I Googled polygamy, and I just found criticisms. That was all I could find. And all of a sudden, I type Book of Abraham and I find explanations from Stephen Smoot. I find explanations from fair conferences. And all of a sudden, all the faithful answers uh, pop up. And I was just thinking, uh, where were you when I was trying to find answers? But I just feel very happy that I I found all these sources. Eventually, I found a video. I think the title was From Mormon to Atheist to Mormon, with a Leo Winiger, and I found Uplift in later years as well, and I got very excited. I was very happy that I was finding answers, and I have to admit the community is much more positive. And I felt safe. I had a safe environment to share my questions. And I remember, and I I was looking at the ex-Mormon Reddit, and well, before that, I just want to share some context. Once you go through this and you come out with either faith or you leave the church, whatever you choose to do, once you go through a faith crisis, for some reason you have this feeling of responsibility. Uh, Now that you've gone through this, you feel like you can help, like or like you need to do something, like uh, so all of this just wasn't in vain. So for some people, that is sharing the stories of how they left. For some, is sharing the story of how they stayed. And I thought about it. I wanted to do something. I didn't know what. Um, but I was looking at the ex-Mormon Reddit, and I thought maybe I can share my story here. And I joined. They let me in, and I posted my story, and it wasn't well received. But I was also very ignorant. I I don't know what I was expecting. Um, I didn't use the best words or phrases or anything like that. But yeah, I remember that I checked.
I want to go see that. Is it even in there anymore? Did you delete it or did they delete it?
I don't know. I think it's still there. But it was back in 2017, 2018. I don't know
Wow, that's a long time
how
ago. Yeah.
yeah.
What
But
do you have an anonymous account on Reddit or do you have is it your name?
I think it's my name. I think that was the one I
Yeah.
used. Um,
I'm gonna have to go back and see if you got any upvotes. Because every time I posted in X Mormon Reddit or the Mormon subreddit, even that one's really critical too. Like every time I can't get more than like a few upvotes. Like they just don't like they like to control they like to
yeah,
control behavior, information, thought, and emotions in those X Mormon spaces. Anyway, go ahead. I'll
yeah,
let you continue.
and no, and when I posted, I well, most of the comments were negative. Um, but as I mentioned, I was very ignorant. I was just telling them that if only you knew the apologetics I knew, or or guys, you're not truly happy. I was very ignorant, so I just uh shared those things, and people were like, what the heck's wrong with you? How dare you say I'm not happy? Things like that. And I remember that I went through every comment. I replied to all of them, and some of the comments I received was, I was in your place a few years ago. I was in denial. I was looking at apologetics too, but I give it a few years, and I bet that you'll be here with us in a few years. And I I remember that I responded to every comment,
Wow.
and when that happened, two things happened. First thing is that someone sent me a private message and said, "Hey, I just looked at your post. I mean, I left the church, but I don't really care that much anymore. But um, I like the fact that you replied and that you are honest. So, if you want to be friends, that's fine with me." And I thought, oh, that's great. We talked, and one day he just didn't respond, but um, that was an experience that I wasn't expecting. I made a friend, and when I finished responding to all comments, like the the main person who was commenting said, you know what? We usually get a lot of this hit and run posts, but you actually stayed and talked to us, so I respect that. So while at first it was a negative experience, it turned into a somewhat positive experience. So um, that was the first time I thought, okay, so things aren't black and white. You're not either an orthodox member or a critic, deceived by Satan or things like that. No, I was beginning to see the nuance behind people's stories, whether they believe or not. And I remember that I I began to find answers to my questions. The very next year, the first volume of Saints came out. There was the Saints Face to Face with Elder Cook and Kate Holbrook, and I remember that I I was glad that people were talking about it, and I think that I went through my faith crisis in a very specific time. I had my questions right before um, online channels, online answers became a mainstream way of spreading the gospel. And just before that, so I had my questions, I chose to believe, and right after it, all of these things came out. So I felt that I was in a good position. And later on, and I don't have them. I think they're in another room, but uh, I got us a birthday present, a couple of books from uh, Dad R. Callister. I got his Blueprint of Crisis Church book. We got a Joseph Smith Papers book. We found it at DI, and I got a case for the Book of Mormon, and I also got the 1830 replica of the Book of Mormon, and I I remember that I like to study about these things. I so at this point I'm 16 and I wanted to go to the temple. That was the very last thing I needed to experience, to feel like I had found answers. So I waited. It was a long 3 years, but eventually I turned 18. I was called to serve in Guatemala, and I went through the temple. And I remember that I was nervous because I knew most of it, but I didn't know how it played out. So I just went through the washing, anointing, and I remember that I felt peaceful. I felt calm. I saw someone with his temple clothing, and when I watched that online, I was a bit weirded out. But I remember that I didn't think that when I saw this person, and that's why I think that if you, you know, I saw some of the temple ceremony online, and then I experienced the temple ceremony, and those are two completely different things. And I went through the temple, and I loved it. I remember it was a very special experience for me, and I became a temple worker while I left on a mission, and I was there every week, from Tuesday to Saturday, all day, and it was awesome. I went through the endowment like 30 times in that time period, and living in a temple, being there was a very special experience for me. So, uh, with all of that background, I went on a mission. Um, and I didn't know how to apply what I had learned because I knew that I wasn't going on a mission to talk about the Kinderhook plate. I was on a mission to talk about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I didn't know if I would ever use that information I learned or or any of the information. So I went to Guatemala, and it was very good. But I as I mentioned, I struggled with depression and anxiety. When I arrived on the mission, I felt that. But I didn't pay too much attention to it because I thought, well, I'm just homesick. That's what everyone goes through, but I'll just lose myself in the work. So I didn't pay too much attention to it. Um, People in Guatemala are great. I was in a small town, and there were many Christian evangelical churches there, and people didn't hate us, but they would never like give us a second chance, a second visit, because everyone had their own congregation and everyone was happy there. And so it was it was difficult to talk to people about the Book of Mormon because the Revelations verse about not adding to the Word of God was something that they told us about, and that's why they couldn't accept the Book of Mormon. And I remember that 2 weeks in my first area, we talked to a man. My trainer said he was interested, so we talked and we taught the restoration. And after we did that, I said, "Do you have any questions about what we talked about today?" And when we talked to him and tried to share Bible verses and things like that, he acted as though he didn't know the Bible at all. And he was like, "Wait, Matthew? Where's Matthew?" And we showed him and things like that. And when we said, "Do you have any questions?" He said, "Well, I have lots of questions." And then he started, he opened his Bible like he knew it by heart all of a sudden and said, "Okay, explain this to me." And he was Catholic, so he talked about Peter and the rock and how that makes it an apostasy impossible. So he said, "I can't believe you. So convince me." And then he just sat there. And I was I was thinking the thoughts that went through my mind were, okay, so you remember that after a while you remember um Constantine, you remember the Nicaea Creed, things like that. All of those things started to go through my mind, but I said, okay, I don't think that I'm supposed to say that. So what am I supposed to do? Uh, so I I didn't say anything. My trainer said something. I don't remember what it was, and we left. So I said, "Oh, um, that didn't go too well." Um, but then uh, we taught someone. Uh, Other missionaries taught him, and when we talked to him for the first time, he already had a baptismal date, but we just taught about the commandments and things like that, and he was baptized in a river. That was interesting. And they didn't have baptismal fonts there. So it was a very special experience, my time in Guatemala. I was dealing with anxiety and depression. It was getting tougher. And that's when I started to think, well, maybe uh, this maybe this is not just being homesick. Maybe this is something else. But I didn't pay too much attention to it. Um, and then we were watching the news one day, and we learned about some people in China who had a disease. We didn't know what it was, but a few weeks later, we watched the news again, and it was spreading through Europe, and then it was in the US, then it was in Mexico, and then the COVID pandemic hit in Guatemala, and we were sent home. I was sent back to Mexico, and I was reassigned to Tijuana. I served the rest of my mission in Tijuana, and I had the same experience, but I for almost a year, I didn't teach and baptize anybody. So for anyone who's in Latin America or for anyone who served in Latin America, uh, people are very open to the gospel, and it's pretty common to teach and baptize people. So in my case, I I didn't I didn't baptize anyone for almost a year. And I thought that that I was failing. And yes, I had a spiritual experience. Yes, I had answers to my questions. Yes, I knew some apologetics, but none of that was helping me. So I thought, well, I guess I'm just not good enough. And yeah, that sort of sent my mental health on a spiral. Eventually, 18 months into my mission, I I was having mental breakdowns um, every week. And my mission president said, "Okay, I guess you need to go home." So I returned early from my mission. I felt ashamed. I felt sad. And when I come back, I'm suddenly reintroduced to the world of apologetics and criticisms. And I was feeling very sad. I was feeling very bad. And I was thinking, I don't have time for that now. And I didn't want to get involved with any of that. I was just trying to find some sort of hope. I met my wife, we dated, we got married, and one day I was on Instagram, and Saints Unscripted said, we want to share stories in our Instagram feed. If you'd like to share one, give us a message. So I said, oh, this is my opportunity. This is how I can do something with my experience. This is how I can help someone. So I sent a DM. I shared my story, and they said, okay, we're preparing the story to be published, so could you help us just connect? Because I said about my anxiety and questions and things like that, and then I said, but you know what? I'm an active member and I believe in the church. So they said, can you connect those two ideas? Can you let us know how you transitioned from feeling sad to being active? And I remember that I I didn't have an answer. I thought my life didn't have a happy ending, so I didn't know how to do that. So I just didn't send anything. I didn't reply, and I felt very sad. I felt that everything I had gone through was in vain, and that I had been exposed to countless hours of criticisms, countless hours of apologetics, and all I ever got from that was anxiety and depression. So I was very sad. I thought all of this was for nothing. And I remember that I prayed to God. I was trying to deal with my situation, but I also said, the gospel means everything to me. I want to do something, but I didn't know what. In school, I was just getting my social media marketing um, degree on Ensign College, and we tried to do a podcast one week, and they taught us how to edit audio and things like that. And I thought, hey, maybe I could do a podcast. So I tried to find a co-host. I talked to one of my friends. He was excited, but he was never available. So we never got around to tape anything. So I thought, okay, I guess I'll put that on hold. And months went by, and I still felt I needed to do something, but I didn't know how or what. I thought maybe uh, doing a Book of Mormon breakdown chapter by chapter, or just talk about criticisms. I didn't know what to do, so I was still watching Saints Unscripted, and I found other channels like LDS Truth Claims, Latter-day Saints Q&A, in Uplift and many other channels. So I remember that I watched a Saints Unscripted interview on someone from Ireland, and his name was Murph. And he talked about his channel, Mormonism with the Murph, and I thought, hey, I should take a look. And I really liked it. At first, because he tries to offer a fair and objective analysis. At first, I didn't really like watching the videos because I didn't like to talk too much about criticisms. But I really liked what he was doing, so I sent him a message. I said, you know what? I listened to your interview. Your stories is pretty similar to mine, so I wanted to say thank you for what you do. And we started a conversation and we talked. And eventually, he interviewed me for his channel. And I remember that when uh, when we were doing the interview, I felt the sudden inspiration to start my channel. I didn't have a good camera, I didn't have a good microphone, I had no budget. So those were the reasons I didn't do anything. But while I was talking with Murph and his channel, I thought I I can do this. It's possible. And I thought, okay, let's start. And then I said, okay, let's come up with a name. What's the name? And I thought it will be called Faith Crisis. No, no, it won't be called Faith Crisis. It'll be called Mormonism with Gus. No, 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 that's already taken. No. And so I kept thinking of names, and then I settled on Faith Journeys. And I said, okay, let's do it. And I said, okay, what do I want to do with the channel? And as I mentioned, there are many channels in for an English speaking audience. In Spanish, there are only a few channels that focus on Come Follow Me. So when it comes to stories, when it comes to apologetics, when it comes to all of that, it was it was pretty open. So I thought, okay, it's pretty exciting. And I just recorded myself. I told my faith journey. That was my first video. And I said, okay, now I need to find guests. And I was afraid that I was going to run out of guests or that I wouldn't find any. But luckily, I was able to find friends and to find people that helped me on my own faith journey. I was able to talk to Dusty, and he's on the channel. I was able to talk to Jeff Roundy from Latter-day Saints Q&A. I was able to talk with Murph, talk with you, Leo. I was able to talk to the brother who gave us the Teotihuacan tour, and I was able to thank him. And this channel has been a beautiful experience of trying to make stories available for other people. Now I talked with Steve Pinecker from Mormon Book Reviews, and he told everyone he knew about the channel, and that put me in contact with people who are members and people who have left the church, and part of me was a little scared because I knew that starting the channel and starting the community was going to find both positive and negative things. And I think I'm not ready to face that again yet. But it's been a wonderful experience to connect with people, even if it's online. It's a very long answer, but I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. We'll actually show you the the channel because it's great. I'm very so here it is. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll get this recorded. But yeah, I've got your videos listed most popular, 520 all the way down. And so yeah, I mean you're still new, but you are getting some views, which is wonderful. I just think it's so important. Like for years, I've been thinking about the the wave that has hit developed countries like the United States and the UK, Great Britain, like Western civilization, especially English speaking countries. Like we've had this wave of skepticism and doubt that, that's just like tearing apart religion. So many people have turned to atheism, and not even just our church, but like most churches in the United States, especially, like they're just not bringing in the same amount of people. The young people aren't attending church, aren't religious, and so they may be spiritual. They say spiritual, but not religious. And so I, like, for years I've been thinking about Latin America and South America, and I'm like, the wave is coming. Like, there's going to be more and more members of the church who leave and who create content, critical content in Spanish against the church. And there's going to be, hopefully some faithful members who can do Spanish channels. And I just think it's so awesome. I think it's just so great, so beautiful that you're doing this. Thank you so much for doing it. And for telling your story, Gustavo. It's awesome. It's so inspiring. I love it. It's nice to connect, like that's why I keep doing what we're doing, and I try to reach out to people, because it's like it's nice to just know that, like, we've been through this hard thing, and we're survivors. Like I call it post faith crisis survivor. Like we're survivors going through something like that. And it's not, it's never easy afterwards, because like you said, like you kind of have like a calling, like you feel like you have to speak up, you have to do something about it. And it's just beautiful. This is a beautiful thing for you to do. So thank you for doing that. um I was going to show you this too. I was just pulling this up. Your story reminds me of this poem that I wrote for Uplift, and it kind of may be a good way for us to end. But you can also, I'd like to also ask you to share your final thoughts, and like if you want to share your testimony, whatever you'd like to share. But this is called Guiding Lights, and it's kind of a journey of three different lights that impact us as we're going through a faith crisis and a faith journey. So the first light represents the light of a computer screen or a phone, um, and all the critical information that we can find that's comes from a light. It's a light on your computer screen or a light on your phone. And then this other light here represents a light from someone in your life who impacts you, like that brother who, um, like he was like a light that shone light on the historical evidence for the Book of Mormon. And when you were visiting that site, that's considered maybe a light, someone who reached out to you or provided you with some kind of hope. And then this one here represents the Savior. And so I'll just read this. So it's called Guiding Lights. A light. I follow, I find, I feed. Meaning that I just devour information on the internet, critical information, consuming more and listening less to God. Darkest fire, devouring, painful burning, cornered, cowering, and bound, but not knowing, hunted, haunted, and alone, frantic mind, searching eyes. And then a light, untrusting, I oblige, mouth moving, heart of steel, deep love and reason, sprouting hope, a sacred seed replanted, nourished, reaching, with faith unshackled again, sensing his yoke, I stand. A light, walking, relaxing. In my moments, in my quiet moments, I listen. The one betrayed, bleeding my blame. And the blame is, I've been blaming the church and blaming leaders, the church leaders. And the Savior, he bled that blame. And then warm sunlight descends, piercing, melting, and soothing. I found life in his light and happiness that never ends. So there's the journey, the viaje de fe, but it's in English. So I don't know if you've read that before, but kind of describes the faith journey that we've been on.
Yeah, I think that, now that I've gone through that, I'm 21 and
Crazy. You've been through so much and you're so young.
and now that all of this has happened, I've learned that people usually go through this after the mission or when they have kids or much later in life. And the fact that I went through this before all of that has been an interesting perspective. Now that I've gone through that, I I think I'm what some people call a true believing Mormon. I in
Yeah.
my day-to-day life, I think I'm a regular member. Um, of course, I love the gospel, and now that I've started the channel, I've been able to do some research. Recently, I was able to purchase rough stone rolling. I remember that when I was trying to find answers, I always read and listened to people talking about the book. I wanted to get the book, and I finally got it. And I plan to expand my book collection. So yeah, as part of the channel, I'm diving in to research. Uh, I don't always like it. Sometimes I get uh, flashbacks, and but something that's helped me is that now that I've gone through the temple, I got sealed to my wife, and now that I can look back, I see that in the end, if God is real, and if this is his church on earth, then the way to find answers is through the Holy Ghost. And that can sound very convenient, like, oh yeah, sure, that's the way to know about truth by a still small voice. But if it's true, that's the way, as inconvenient as it may be. So I think that's something I had to come to terms with back then when I was having my questions. Now, well, I enjoy sometimes learning about, uh, I don't know if evidences. Uh, I like the stick of Joseph, for example, and things like that. So while I'm still interested in that, uh, my faith became less dependent on that. Um, I remember also that there were some videos, and I'm gonna name drop them, but just so that you can understand what I'm saying. But I remember that there were some Mormon Stories episodes that I thought, just by the title, going by the title, I thought were going to be earth-shattering to me. I didn't want to watch them back in the day because I thought it would destroy my faith. Um, but out of curiosity, a few months ago, I said, well, let's see. And it didn't affect me, and it felt peaceful. You know, back in the day, I bet I would have felt shattered and afraid. But now I feel peace. I feel calm. I can feel the spirit, and that's a change that has helped me to navigate through these things and still find faith in God and Christ. And I have to be honest, one time I have already accepted if the church isn't true. Back then when I was having my questions, when I was having doubts, um, some people say, well, you just believe because you're too afraid to accept the truth. But back then, I accepted the fact that it wasn't true. For a very small fraction, I didn't believe in the church, and it was pretty scary. So I have already come to terms with it in a way. I believe in the church, and I will continue to do so. But what I mean by that is that even if the church turned out to be false for any reason, just if that was the case, with the Christian mindset, I don't think that God will would put me in hell uh, for believing in the church. Um, I would believe that would be very unfair, and I would say, God, even just in just pretending, right? If I saw God and He said, "Well, you were a Mormon, and that was a false gospel, so you'll go to hell." So I imagine myself saying, God, I I accepted Jesus Christ. I repented it. I had faith in Him. I dedicated my whole life to follow His example, and you'll send me to hell because I thought you were a man? And to me, that doesn't make sense. To me, that doesn't show a compassionate God. Just because I believe that He has a body of flesh and bones, that makes me worthy of going to hell. I don't think that that's God. I don't think that shows a loving God. So even if the church wasn't true, I feel peace that I love God and that I try to follow Him. And now the possibility, what if God isn't real? And what if you die and that's it? In that case, my experiences I've seen, while it's still in the realm of faith, I do believe that there is a God. I do believe there's something spiritual and not just physical about existence. So I feel more peace about that. I still have to have faith, but I I'm more towards believing in God. So even if a church isn't true, I have peace in my soul. So now that I do believe that the church is true, then that hope and that peace is much stronger. So, for anyone in the Uplift community or anyone who watches my videos, I I think that spiritual journey, uh, once you have that confirmation, it will trump anything. You know, you may not know why Joseph took the Kinderhook plates and said, "Oh, let me have a look at it," instead of saying, "It's a scam." You may not know that, but if you know that God is real, if you know that Jesus exists, if you have a testimony of the Book of Mormon, then I think that's it. If Joseph became a fallen prophet, then I think that God would have done something about it sooner because it was a restoration. So if he was a fallen prophet, I don't think that God would just let that one slide and let the world fall in apostasy again. So that's why I believe that is a very strong foundation. I I've had some people come up to me who watch the videos and ask some questions. And I don't know, I personally I don't feel very capable of answering people's questions, and And I'm still uh, struggling with that, with being more confident with that. But you know, I have a firm testimony of God, of answers to prayers, and I think that that can help you with unanswered questions. But I do believe that God is merciful enough that He does give answers. Uh, and it took me a while. But for example, this year, I finally understood some things that I didn't understand before. 6 years after my faith crisis, I found answers. So I think that with patience and time, things will work out.
I would say our Savior is amazing, and praise be to our Savior and to our all the wonderful people and spirits that are on the other side, who are helping us. I'm clapping because it's like it's just such a beautiful story, and that you are an old soul, Gustavo. You are 21, but you just like you're just a wise old soul. You've got so much experience, and I'm sure even though you don't feel like you can, answer questions or whatever, um, if you don't feel like that now, I'm sure soon enough, because you've got such a wealth of experience. Just beautiful. So yeah, I think we're good. I think this has been a great introduction to you and to your channel. And I think we'll probably wrap it up. Do you have any other final words of advice or anything else you want to share before we close out?
Um, well, for any of you who haven't done so yet, join the Uplift Community of Faith group. I recommend The Stick of Joseph, Saints Unscripted, Latter-day Saints Q&A, Mormons with Murph, LDS Truth Claims, and BOU Speeches, and the
Mhm.
Book of Mormon.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Gustavo. And we'll be in touch. Hopefully we can get together and in person one day, maybe. Um, and if not, then we'll hang out in the next life. But God bless you, brother, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.